Here with reaction to this news today, just breaking this hour, Doug Blair joins us now. He's the author of the Blair Broadcast Substack, and he's a polling analyst as well. I want to talk about the impact on this race that this decision has. Doug, good to have you with us, sir.
Good to be here, Vince. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Doug, what do you make of RFK's announcement and just his scathing assessment of the Democrat Party in the press?
Well, I think he's absolutely correct to note that his campaign, which has been one of the most successful third-party campaigns we've seen since he mentioned Ross Perot, the fact that they basically treated him as a joke candidate, I think, is just a more obvious piece of evidence that the media is in the tank for the Democrats. I mean, if we look at some of the polling data that we've had recently, even before he announced he was going to drop out, in places like Utah, which is very strongly, obviously, a Trump state. It's a very red state. He was still polling at almost 20%. He was about 18% before he decided to make the move to drop out. So this is not some fringe Cornel West, Jill Stein type candidate. This was a very serious contender that was sapping votes from both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. I think the mainstream media, though, recognized that he was dangerous and they wanted to tamp down on him as much as possible.
Yeah, and he's a perfect case study and actually kind of a useful one because he's not traditionally a part of certainly the Republican Party. That's not the way you would think of him. So he's kind of on the outside of that. And you can look at him with objective eyes. And what you're seeing is that the media, as he points out, didn't allow his voice to even be heard on their networks throughout his campaign. And then when he was discussed, he was slandered. They would refer to him as things like anti-vax, which is not even true. If anything, he's vaccine cautious. And yet they would construe him in dishonest ways in order to kick him out of the debate entirely and to say that you shouldn't take him seriously.
Absolutely. And I mean, this is the same type of behavior that they would use with a lot of Republican candidates, which is why they saw him as opposition, right? You can see the playbook that they use with Republicans very much at play here. He's anti-science. He's anti-vaccine. He hates all of these, like, he's a weird person. All of these arguments that they would try and use to somebody that they don't want you to take him seriously. I think that now that he's out and that he's looking to endorse Trump, I think that you'll start to see those attacks ramp up because you'll start to see, oh, well, he was never a Democrat. He was never independent. He was just in this race to bolster Trump. He was just in this race to boost Donald Trump. I think that the American people hopefully are smart enough to see past that. They'll see that there is a genuine discontent, and the polling reflects this, with both Harris and Trump, and that RFK had offered a nice third way out of both of those parties.
Yeah, and in fact, to your point about the attacks on RFK as a result of his decision today, they've already begun with his partisan brain-dead family members who have also, 5 of them at least, have signed on to a statement today saying that, quote, "We believe in Harris and Walz. Our brother Bobby's decision to endorse Trump today is a betrayal of the values that our father and our family hold most dear. It is a sad ending to a sad story." His own family, Doug, now once again attacking him for daring to even challenge the party, in this case, the Democrat Party. And as you heard in RFK's statement, he actually offers, I think, a really, really talented and devastating indictment of how the so-called values of the Democratic Party are tyrannical. They don't actually represent what's supposed to be in their name, which is democracy.
Agreed. And I think it's very telling as well that those same family members, probably before Harris was coronated as the Democratic candidate, were probably in the background saying, how do we get rid of Harris? She's dead weight. I mean, if you look at the mainstream media, how they discussed Harris before she was basically given the nomination, it was, she's terrible, she's polling worse than Biden is, she has all of this political baggage, how do we dump her for, say, a Josh Shapiro or a Gretchen Whitmer? And then all of a sudden, once it was sort of decided that she was going to be the candidate, everybody had to coalesce around her. So I do find it deeply ironic that the Kennedys are going to basically try and talk about how they are protecting democracy and that their brother is not. Their family member is not a representative of democracy. But look, I think that they are onto something when it comes to who this is going to benefit. I think if we look at the polling data, it's very clear that with RFK dropping out and endorsing Trump, this will benefit Trump. So there's some data that we have from a place called Harris X It's a polling firm here locally in Washington, D.C. If there was a three-way race nationally, you would have Trump at 44%, Harris at 46%, and Kennedy at 9%. If you get rid of RFK, though, and he drops out, all of a sudden, Trump actually jumps higher than Harris does. She's at 51% versus 49% for Harris. So I think it's very clear why they are so threatened by RFK, because they do recognize that while he was taking vote share from both parties, it was pretty night and day that a lot of people who would more be in Trump's camp were going to RFK, and I think that they will probably return home now that he's out of the race and he has endorsed Trump.
And it wasn't like that when Biden was in the race, right? At that time, RFK was taking more from would-be Biden supporters than he was from Trump. Isn't that right?
That is correct. So you would see that Biden was so toxic to, I think, the average voter that people were basically saying, look, this guy maybe aligns a little bit more with the Democratic Party. He's a Kennedy. I'm going to vote for him instead of Biden. Now that all of a sudden Harris has basically gotten, weeks now of free press from the media, of free spawning attention, all of a sudden I think a lot of those people were now saying, oh, well, Trump, the one that I was going to say, oh, I'm going to go with RFK instead of Trump. That might change now. Like I said, the polling data does reflect that since RFK is going to drop out and he's going to endorse Trump, it looks like a lot of that voter share is going to go back to him. But I would assume that the media coverage is going to continue to inflate Kamala Harris's numbers.
Yeah, they're going to do everything they can to try and destroy RFK even further than they already have attempted it. So you mentioned a number that struck me as pretty impressive a moment ago, which is that RFK in nationwide polling, if I heard you correctly, Doug Blair, that he has 9% support according to, is it the Harris X survey?
This is a Harris X survey, correct, that indicates in a three-way race, RFK was at 9% nationally. And I mean, again, if you want to look at certain red states, I think Utah is a really great example of this because this is a very Republican state. It went for Trump very heavily. He was polling at 20%, right? I mean, there are people in places like Utah that are not super happy with the way that the two-party system has worked out for them. A lot of people have mentioned the uniparty. I think a lot of that is resonating with a lot of American voters. And so he was able to attract double digits worth of attention. I think that is very indicative of the world that we are right now, where both political parties have very serious problems with attracting and maintaining loyalty amongst their voter base, because they look at what's happening in Washington, they look at what their representatives of the presidency, what the people in charge are doing, and they say, you're not benefiting me. I still feel like I am being left behind. And it doesn't matter if you're a Democrat or Republican. I need somebody to listen to me.
Yeah, and RFK represented, in a lot of ways, a radical break from that system, especially when it came to issues of health and corruption. He's been, this really has been his focus for so long, so I could see why he would appeal as a third-party option. Will the fact that he is joining with Trump, clearly you're indicating that you think that this will help. How much help will it be to President Trump? Because really, it's going to that does send a signal, you would think, to the types of people who would support RFK rather than the other two mainstream candidates, that Donald Trump is taking seriously the issues that RFK has raised on the campaign trail.
Correct. Well, so look, we basically are sort of predicting here. Obviously, the art of polling is more about prediction. It's not about actually saying what is going to happen. But we've noticed in some more recent polling in July, about 10% of RFK's base seems like it's going to be very strongly swayed in one direction or another. If you add that up, it's about 2% of a particular state's vote or a particular national vote, which when you think about 2%, that's not a huge number, but look at the margins, right? Yes. Look at how 2020 went, how close it was. With a couple thousand votes, we could have been seeing a secondary Trump term. So if you're looking at these very, very thin margins, even that that little tiny push in one direction or another is enough to decide this election. So this could have a massive impact on who wins the presidency come November. And I think it's going to be very interesting, given that the attacks have already started against RFK as some sort of Trump surrogate, that's what the DNC thinks as well.
Also, outside of the issues that he's concerned about, just his ability to offer a very cogent indictment of the left. Man, talk about a useful thing on the campaign trail. So, yes, the media hasn't covered his independent candidacy, but if he becomes a spokesman on the trail for Donald Trump and he is savaging the authoritarian impulses of the Democrat Party, that really could have an impact on voters, whether it changes their votes or whether it leads some Democrat voters to say, you know what, I don't think I can actually support this party. I'm going to sit this one out.
Absolutely. And he mentioned during that, as you mentioned, scathing indictment of the Democratic Party that they're trying to tamp down on these third parties. And one of those things happening right now in Wisconsin, I wrote about this for the Blair broadcast, is that there is a Democratic operative that is suing the state's election board to make sure that the Green Party, Jill Stein, is not allowed to stand for president, that she will not be appearing on the ballot. The logic being some very contrived legalistic laws. But again, I think that he's very strongly condemning them for talking about how we are the party of democracy, right? Democrats are here to protect democracy. Democracy dies in darkness. It will die if Donald Trump is allowed to take office. And yet they are the ones, when given the opportunity, state by state, are attempting to get third parties off the ballot. They are attempting to say it is only Democrats or Republicans that are allowed to run. RFK doesn't get to talk. He doesn't get to do the interviews. Jill Stein cannot appear on the Wisconsin ballot. It's very simple. If you look at who's actually attacking democracy, it's not the Republicans. It's very clearly the Democrats.
Corey just sent me this. Corey, this is a memo that's come out from the Trump campaign and their pollster, Tony Fabrizio. I guess this just came out in the last few minutes. And it says confidential memorandum. It's not confidential anymore. I'm not reading it over the air. What RFK Jr.'s exit and endorsement means, it's dated today, and they say with the exit of RFK Jr. from the race and his endorsement of President Trump, there will undoubtedly be a great deal of speculation of what it means and who it will help. He said he's seen the Harris folks already trying to spin that it won't impact the race. He says actually the data speaks for itself. And then he shares a table from their most recent round of battleground state surveys. As you can clearly see, says Tony Fabrizio, again, this is the Trump campaign pollster, in every single state, RFK Jr.'s vote breaks for President Trump. And then he runs down state by state, these battleground states, how much current support RFK has there. Arizona, 5%, Georgia, 3%, Michigan, 4%, and North Carolina, 3%, Nevada, 4%, Pennsylvania, 4%, Wisconsin, 4%. And says all of this is adding up to good news for Donald Trump today heading into this weekend, Doug Blair.
Agreed. And I think that Fabrizio is absolutely correct to note that. And like I said, even though those numbers might not seem massive, 2%, 3%, 4%, those are still numbers that are going to impact these elections. When the political environment is as, let's say, fraught as it is right now, and people basically are very hard to move, it's almost about pulling those tiny little bits of numbers that'll get you across the finish line. So whether that is, like you mentioned earlier, Vince, getting Democrats to stay home, or whether that's pulling a couple of thousand independents towards the Trump camp, Trump must be celebrating and Harris must be fuming right now based on this information.
Fabrizio ends by pointing out the following. He says the net vote gained in a state like Arizona based on just the 2020 turnout model would be over 41,000 votes. That's nearly 4 times Biden's winning margin in Arizona. Or in Georgia, the net gain from today's news would be over 19,000 votes. That's nearly twice Biden's margin there. So this is, as you pointed out earlier in our conversation, Doug, in races that are separated by just thousands of votes, this is a massive news item in this campaign.
Absolutely. And like I said earlier, expect to see attacks on Robert Francis Kennedy Jr. as a Trump surrogate, as somebody who was never actually in this to carve a third path out. Expect attacks like he's a threat to democracy, a lot of the things that we'll be seeing. Now, what I would really appreciate if people were paying attention to, though, is that, again, what is the angle that Democrats are going with? It is not to protect democracy. It is not to actually make your life better. It is not to enrich the lives of the American people. It is to maintain and to claim power. And that is all that it is.
Yeah, quite unfortunately. Doug Blair, thank you from Blair Broadcast Substack. Good to talk to you today.